Guys, it's me coming to you today, working from home, looking like I've been playing video games all day. And I'm not going to confirm or deny which is true. Was I working or playing in video games? That's for you to decide. Today I'm here to give you guys the Captain Marvel review. I have been waiting for this. This is my first movie review, so I'm really excited. And lucky for me, my first movie review is about a woman superhero, which I think is even doper than dope. Let me get 5 seconds to catch my breath. Okay, angle 1, coming to you as a woman, and angle 2, coming to you as someone who has been invested in the MCU since the very beginning. So as a woman, I think this movie was actually a really great movie for showing off girl power and really kicking off Women's History Month, as well as Women's International Women's Day. Y'all know what I meant. What really helps, especially when it comes to Women's History Month, is the fact that this movie kind of reflected on women joining the military and what their roles were seen or what they were able to do, and kind of how they were limited within the military. As you see, Carol and Maria, when talking about the history, they were only allowed to fly the testing planes that Dr. Lawson had created. That was the only time to like really do something impactful. And so you really see kind of Carol's journey as a little kid and constantly being told like she's not good enough, she can't do this, all the way up into her joining the military and etc., to really show like girl power, being strong and moving forward. And I thought it was super dope. I think that one of my favorite parts of the movie, besides the fact that we had a grandma kicking ass. Now don't get me wrong, I know the grandma was really a Skrull, but it was super dope that they chose a grandma. Like whose grandma really whooping ass like that? So I thought that was pretty dope. But I also think my favorite part is when Carol and Jan Rock are going at it towards the end of the movie, and he's just like, you know, I'm so proud of you, and you know, I know you could really beat me if you could beat me with your 2 fists. And she just blasts him and literally says to him, I have nothing to prove to you. Like, sis, yes, we don't have anything to prove to these fools. And I think also just as an everyday woman viewer, I really liked the comedy behind it, and I just loved Carol's personality and how witty she was and XYZ. I don't really have any bad on the women angle, so we're just gonna jump right in to being invested in the MCU. Woo! One of my favorite parts was the subtle connections that it had to other movies that have been present in the Marvel Cinematic Universe of today. First subtle connection that I absolutely really loved was Agent Coulson, but we haven't seen Agent Coulson in movies since the first Avengers, where he died, right? And so I think it was super dope that we were able to bring him back, see him when he's fresh in S.H.I.E.L.D., and kind of also see how him and Fury's bond started, because you saw that trust that was built once Coulson let Fury and Carol get away. So I absolutely thought that was great. Like, I was so excited to see that he was back and looking younger and full of energy. And so unless you really watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., you haven't seen Coulson since the first Avengers, so I loved how they brought him back. The second connection, which is not as subtle but still kind of subtle, was the Tesseract. Like, hello, the Tesseract done been in like every freaking movie. So let's start. So time order, the Tesseract was first used by the Red Skull in Captain America. Also in the first Avengers, there's a scene where you see the Tesseract being tested on, and it's actually tested in Project Pegasus, which is like, whoa, Project Pegasus, I didn't know that was a thing. Well, now you know, so the little details, right? And by the end of the first movie, you see that the Tesseract is taken back to Asgard with Thor. Cool. After that, you see it again in Thor Ragnarok, where Loki has hidden the Tesseract after Asgard has been destroyed, and now they're all in outer space floating, and what's gonna happen to Asgard. And then finally, you see the Tesseract in Avengers Infinity War, when it's actually taken from Loki and Thor by Thanos, and everybody dies. Another subtle connection that I absolutely loved was seeing Ronan the Accuser and Korath the Pursuer again. So if you don't recognize them, they were actually in Guardians of the Galaxy, where you did see some symbols of them being a part of the Kree Nation. but it wasn't like a direct connection between Guardians of the Galaxy, the Kree Nation, and Captain Marvel. So of course, when seeing Guardians of the Galaxy, you wouldn't have known that this was gonna pop up. You know, it's kind of like a separate story at a separate time. And of course, things are going to overlap because they are in the same universe. There's the deleted scene in Iron Man 2, where Tony Stark is talking to Jarvis and asks him to pull up data on Project Pegasus, in which you find out that Tony Stark's father was actually a founder of Project Pegasus. Isn't that crazy? Now, I know for some people, if you haven't seen the deleted scene, you wouldn't know, but I hope that just blew your mind. If you notice, Captain Mar-vell in this movie is actually a woman. And so they did a gender swap. In the comics, Captain Mar-vell is a man named Walter Lawson, and I thought it was actually pretty ingenious that they switched the character to be Wendy Lawson, who is still Captain Mar-vell, who is still Kree, who is still undercover, and her character still fits along the lines of who Captain Mar-vell is in the comics. Not that you get super deep into who she is, but it still aligns with Captain Mar-vell overall, even though he was a man. So I absolutely love that gender swap. My next favorite thing about this movie was the fact that the way Nick Fury lost his eye was because of a cat, which was really a flirkin. But I think it was so funny how we've had all this suspense built up from other movies on, you know, you don't trust somebody. Last time I trusted somebody, I lost an eye. And, you know, he uses that eye as like a method of fear and warning, and then come to find out you were just holding a flirkin in your hand who you absolutely loved and adored, and he just scratched your eye out. And I understand he did trust the Flurkin. You know, they were riding hard for most of that movie, and the Flurkin defended him a lot. So of course he wouldn't expect the Flurkin to, you know, attack him in that way. Well, attack. But I did think it was pretty funny how you find out, you know, you go through this whole movie thinking, oh my God, and maybe it's this scene, it's that scene, he's gonna get his eye, you know, shot out or something crazy like that, and it's really just Goose. That's it. My last like about this movie was that it didn't fall too far from the comics. So just like any other Marvel movie in this MCU, there are liberties that have been taken, and of course this is technically supposed to happen in a different universe than the comics. Some of the parallels that, you know, stayed very similar was Yon-Rogg and Captain Mar-vell were still very much a part of the reason of how Carol Danvers got her powers. It happened a little different in the comics. There was still an explosion and all that and etc. But what actually happened in the comics was when there was an explosion of this big machine that starts with a P. Once that machine blew up, it merged Captain Mar-vell's DNA with Carol's, and that's how she actually got her powers, from Captain Mar-vell, not from the energy core. But I like how it still was kind of centered around that rivalry or that fight between Yon-Rogg and Captain Mar-vell. That's how Carol still got her powers. You know, if it wasn't for that altercation in the movie, this wouldn't have happened. So the fact that the altercation still kind of stayed the same, I did like that. I also like the fact that if you do read Captain Marvel comics, you do know that Carol losing her memories, whether it's done by other people or by accidents, is actually a recurring theme in a lot of Captain Marvel comics. So I like how they stay true to that in this origin story where she doesn't really know much and is rediscovering herself. So that actually did make a lot of sense. And then lastly, I love the fact that we have Goose. So Goose in this movie is Captain Mar-vell's cat, aka Flurkin. In the comics, there's also a cat, aka Flurkin, that is named Chewie, which is actually Carol's cat. She doesn't always know that it's a Flurkin. She actually finds out later that it's a Flurkin. But Chewie and Goose actually look, they're exact same cat. If you see a picture of Chewie, you'll be like, oh my God, that's really just the comic book version of Goose. So I did like that they kind of did play on that. All right, so let's go to the bad. First things first, if you know me, you know I have been talking about this for a long time. I was honestly not excited to see this movie, give the movie my money, nothing like that, because I'm not a big fan of Brie Larson. Brie Larson is kind of dry. She didn't really do nothing for me. You know, in another world, I feel like we should have took Gal Gadot and Brie Larson and split them. DC only has one good movie, that's just my opinion, and it wouldn't have hurt if, you know, Wonder Woman wasn't that great, but Captain Marvel was awesome because we had Gal Gadot. That's just me. Okay, moving on. So, I'm not gonna lie, Brie Larson did more for the role than I expected her to, but overall, I still feel like somebody could have been better casted, because she didn't really do it for me. Like, I feel like she made the movie kind of meh, and it was like, oh, all right, well, Brie Larson is here, guys, woo, you know? So the next bad is kind of like, I will say, a downer for fans and people who are kind of like having theories on where the storyline of this current Marvel universe is gonna go. There's been a lot of speculation that this Marvel universe will go in the direction of the Secret Invasion comics. If you don't know what the Secret Invasion comics is, it is pretty much a quick synopsis where it's pretty much where Skrulls are taking the identities of actual Marvel superheroes. And it was a really big thing, and there's been a lot of theories that that's going to be the direction of where the current Marvel Cinematic Universe goes. However, because of this movie, I think that's just impossible now, because we now see the Skrulls as allies. And yeah, granted, this movie is supposed to be set in 1996. However, and you know, things can change in that time, but however, you know, I feel like Marvel would have to do a huge backstory on how we could even possibly get back to that timeline. So I feel like it was kind of disappointing, because it would have been cool. And there's that whole theory out there that Hawkeye and his family are actually Skrulls, and now I feel like that's dead. Like, what are we, like, how are we gonna get back to that? So that's kind of my bad. I feel like they let a lot of us down in thinking that this is where we were gonna go with it, but in fact, it's now a whole different direction and we don't know, which could also be seen as a good. Now there's some suspense, and it's kind of like, okay, now we're all in question, like, yeah, where is this gonna go, you know? I think my last bad was like, this movie wasn't all that great. I did love like some of the comic book connections, and I did love, you know, that this is a great women empowerment story, but overall, you know, rating it amongst other Marvel movies, it wasn't what it could be, especially for one of the first movies with a woman as a leading role. And keep in mind, like, moving forward, Captain Marvel is supposed to be leading the Avengers, so I just feel like her movie could have come a lot harder by also recasting Brie Larson, just saying. As an origin story, it did do its job, and the action, you know, was pretty good. Like, it wasn't bad, but there was just some oomph missing. But moving on to the best part of this video, we are now going to talk about the real Captain Marvel. And I ain't talking about Carol Danvers, I'm talking about Monica Rambeau. So let's talk a little bit about Monica. In this movie, you see her as Carol's niece, and Maria's daughter. So bringing it back to just Carol and Maria, in the comics, they aren't actually friends. They don't even know each other. And the only relevance of Maria in the comics is the fact that she's Monica's mother. So where does Monica come into play? Well, fun fact, in the comics, Monica actually was named Captain Marvel before Carol Danvers was. Shocker, it's crazy, right? And so I think what they're doing in this movie is they're trying to elude the fact that Monica is going to somehow come into play as an Avenger later in time. And if you're wondering, well, how they're going to be two Captain Marvels, well, truth is, in the comics, Monica does take on different superhero aliases. Besides Captain Marvel, she's also known as Photon and Spectrum. And that's because she actually has pretty similar powers to Carol Danvers when it comes to energy and light. I'm not going to go too much into her origin story, because I do want to save that for another video I have coming up soon. But my theory is that she is going to be introduced somehow in the next Avengers, in Avengers Endgame, whether it's the end of the movie or somewhere in the middle. But she's going to be introduced to Spectrum. If you actually go on Marvel's website right now and you look up Monica Rambeau, she is under the alias of Spectrum, not Captain Marvel. And I think that is going to play a part, and she's going to start to have her own story. So I know many people are watching the movie thinking, oh, she's just some little girl who wants to be a pilot and things like that. But those hints at her being a pilot, or Maria said, yeah, one day, you know, you'll glow just like your Auntie Carol. That's actually a nod at the comics of Monica Rambeau being a really big part of the Avengers. In many comics. Maybe eventually, you know, they're going to introduce her in Avengers, because by Avengers Endgame, Monica is going to be somewhere in her 30s. So I'll be damned if they bring her in to the story and like she don't got no powers. That's not going to make any sense. But I could see them also kind of making it her origin story in some way. And then from there, either she's going to have her own movies, or they're going to somehow incorporate her into Captain Marvel's franchise moving forward, considering that she kind of was in the beginning with Captain Marvel. So I can very well see that happening. But honestly, that was the part that excited me about the movie the most, is the fact that they introduced Monica Rambeau's character. Like, are you serious? Like, that was just such a big Easter egg. Like, if you don't know, now you know. Like, that shit was crazy. Just looking at her, like, you have this little girl in there and people have no idea what her potential is or what she's gonna be one day. Like, that's insane. So hopefully, just hopefully, they include Spectrum, because I really think there's a fan base for Spectrum that once they found out who Monica was, they were like, okay, something's gonna happen from this, and they'd be letting a bunch of us down if they don't. Anyway, that is the end of my theory that we will be introduced to the real Captain Marvel, aka Spectrum, aka Photon, aka everything else that she's been. If you do want more on Monica and her history, I will be doing a video later this month on bad bitches in comics, and she will definitely be on that list. So stay tuned for that. Please don't forget to subscribe, and that's about it. Bye guys.